first of all, I just want to say thank you for staying around if it's your dinner time to listen to me speak. My name is Emily Rochette, and I'm from the University of Melbourne. Now, we are going to diverge from big data, and we are going to go into much smaller qualitative data sets to explore the extent to which a subject-related professional history offers security for secondary science teachers managing the use of digital technologies out of field. So let's get started right into the Australian context. So in Australia, our general science teachers are expected to teach across biology, chemistry, earth and space sciences, and physics, and they need to do this while incorporating digital technologies to teach science inquiry skills. So we know that this is quite a tall order, and it might cause one to question what it actually means to be an in-field general science teacher. So with the exception of the Australian state of New South Wales, our teachers are registered without reference to year level or subject specialization. And the best, I guess, definition that we do have is from Weldon, who used data from the Staff in Australia Schools surveys to define an in-field teacher as a person who studied a subject for at least one semester at second year tertiary level, with or without being instructed in subject-specific teaching methodologies. Now, although pre-service teachers enrolled in initial teacher education programs may have second year tertiary experience in one or more subdisciplines of science, it's extremely unlikely that they would have this level of depth across all four subdisciplines. So Hobbes draws attention to the importance of, quote, cross-fertilization of pedagogies between specialist and non-specialist disciplines. However, the literature has shown for some time that this is quite a complicated matter. Now, in this presentation, what I'd like to do is draw attention to the experiences of science teachers who, although they are deemed subject specialists, they are teaching out-of-field disciplines of science. So we know that geoscience is one of these subdisciplines. This is the study of Earth's solid components and the processes acting on them. And it's one context in which many general science teachers internationally find themselves teaching out of field. Geoscience is a modern scientific enterprise that, when distilled to a school subject, technologies readily available for classroom use like Google Earth can assist students to collect and analyze data, yielding evidence about Earth's structure and history. However, the epistemic practices of geoscientists are distinct from those of, say, chemists or physicists in terms of the unpredictive nature of this subdiscipline. So as such, the epistemic practices of geoscientists may remain transcendental to non-specialists. Now, with these conceptual abstractions in mind, incorporating technologies to teach those inquiry skills becomes a problem of, we don't know what we don't know. So Hobbes highlights a tension between learning as a qualification and learning as experience. So perhaps this is an area to be addressed through initial teacher education and the recruitment of STEM professionals. This highlights the professional expectations for our teacher educators who model the use of digital technologies across the subdisciplines. Now, speaking from experience, I know that chemistry teacher educators model the use of technologies in distinct ways to earth science teacher educators. Furthermore, scholars have called into question teacher educators' capacity to effectively attend to these professional duties. So at the symposium last year, I presented a positioning theory analysis of interview data that exemplified teachers' skills along a continuum of digital technology use. Don't worry about reading them. We'll explain a little bit about what these terms mean later on in the presentation. So conversations arising from the symposium and the resulting book chapter inspired a further question to be explored. To what extent does a subject-related professional history offer security for secondary science teachers managing their use of digital technologies out of field? Now, this presentation is going to introduce you to 4 secondary science teachers with distinct subject-related degree experiences and at different stages in their career. Positioning theory was the overarching methodology informing my data collection and analysis as teachers reflected on their rights and duties to teach science with digital technologies. 2 principles informed my understanding of the meaning ascribed to these teachers' actions. 1, what people say and do hinges on judgment. And 2, their identity is the product of interpersonal interactions that include what a person is temperamentally able to do, perceives to be permitted or forbidden to do, and has done, is doing, or will do. So the positioning triad offers a lens through which teachers' interview data were analyzed to better understand their interpretations of their rights and duties. Semi-structured interviews were utilized to collect participants' discursive practices. These are the verbal and nonverbal symbolic exchanges that indicate the normative frames through which people think, feel, act, and perceive. And discursive practices can have intentional and intended or unintended outcomes depending on how others perceive them and the history of interactions in the social situation unfolding. These are evident in the power imbalances that we see emerging as individuals are positioned and repositioned as they fully or partially ascribe to the rights and duties assigned to them by others, if in fact at all. Now, to better understand an individual's personal agency, positioning theorists employ what we call pronoun grammar analysis to track these moment-to-moment shifts in positions that signal plots in storylines. So we'll be focusing a lot today on I and me pronouns and you pronouns. Now, to better understand teachers' emerging storylines within the education context, I'm drawing on the work of Clandinin and Connolly to differentiate between sacred stories. These are the theory-driven view of practice that are shared by teachers, policymakers, and theoreticians, and secret stories, which are about classroom practice that can be in tension with those sacred stories. So with all that being said, let me introduce you to Charlotte and William, who are experienced teachers with distinct subject-related professional histories. Charlotte's background is in pharmacology, and she transitioned to teaching after short contracts working as a laboratory assistant and a representative for a pharmaceutical company. These were jobs which she described as boring and soul-destroying. William had a background in electrical engineering, and prior to entering the profession, he sold high-end computer workstations, wrote software for industry, and dabbled in particle physics research. Compared to Charlotte, William's professional history in the computing industry could be assumed to position him with a greater security for teaching out of field with digital technologies. However, at the time of data collection, both Charlotte and William were identified as expert technology users. As such, they sought out and learned how to use or adapt digital technologies with an emphasis on teaching science inquiry skills. And when invited to reflect on their use of technologies, their reflections were deeply personal. For Charlotte, this meant teaching students how to design experiments and the skills to utilize data logging equipment. Speaking on behalf of teachers using we, Charlotte positioned herself and her colleagues with this duty. Her reflections of her self-ascribed duties to incorporate technologies into her practice, however, extend further than simply meeting curriculum demands. They evoked an affective response as she went out of her way to use technologies across subdisciplines of science while ascribing herself a right to have fun, and hopefully the kids will learn something along the way. Like Charlotte, William asserted a right to choose the technologies to be used in his classroom. He held a deeply seated belief, quote, "I believe intrinsically that human beings are learning creatures." And this seemed to provide William with a sense of oughtness, driving him to utilize technology in pedagogically distinct ways from his colleagues. William used YouTube videos and Socrative online quiz software to mediate peer-to-peer discussion as students grappled with alternative conceptions in physics. And this was an approach that enabled him to teach through dialogic instruction. Notably, in this government school, teacher professionalism is respected, and they're afforded the freedom to explore, plan for, and skillfully refine their pedagogical practices. Asserting a right to choose which technologies to use seemed to be promoting a sense of job satisfaction and enabled Charlotte and William to recognize their skills as transferable to the out-of-field area. So here, Charlotte has made candy to model the formation of rocks and minerals, and she's incorporated her data logging equipment to better understand what temperatures are needed to get these things started. Williams incorporated a random number generator and a calculator to model the reclamation costs as his students mined Christmas cake for precious metals. So as professionals, these teachers' sacred stories emerging were something like, we are responsible for the selective use of technologies in ways that are transferable across subdisciplines. Now, at the time of data collection, Rachel and Ethan were early career teachers. And after 10 years in neuroscience and biomedical research, Rachel entered the teaching profession for job security. The government doesn't support medical research as much as they should. Prior to embarking on a 10-year career in research technology, thought about becoming a teacher. And he turned to the profession when he felt he had, quote, reached the ceiling and didn't want to become a laboratory director. So both Rachel and Ethan share similar subject-related professional histories as career research scientists in areas where their technological skills could be assumed to be transferable to the classroom. Yet both managed their use of digital technologies to varying extents. Rachel identified a professional duty to teach science with digital technologies, including the technological skills students were required to develop, but Ethan did not. So the following quotations that I'm going to present to you offer some insight into their practice. Here, Rachel begins with you, and she seems to distance herself from the ideas as she explains that digital technologies need to be used with purpose. She personally locates herself in the discussion by reflecting on a departure from her lesson plan to model the critical thinking skills required for effective internet searches. A sacred story emerges. Attending to my duty to teach technologies is important. Now, Ethan begins by personally locating himself in his explanation of the skills students should be able to employ, and he even identifies a digital literacy as an important component to completing schoolwork. However, in the final sentence of the turn, an absence of personal pronouns seems to indicate that Ethan is distancing himself from the situation. And he's absconding from his duty to teach digital literacy. So for Ethan, the secret story emerging is, I'm a teacher of content, not technology. Rachel and Ethan's reflections distill their technological skills to those they perceive to be appropriate for secondary schooling. Although these skills reflect some of the goals of the state-mandated curriculum documents, their reflections indicate that scientific researchers who train as teachers cannot be assumed to intuitively draw on their transferable skills for technology-enabled learning. Notably, being early career teachers, neither Rachel nor Ethan had an established practice teaching geoscience. Both attended the same university for their initial teacher education, and reflecting on their geoscience teacher education experience, they reported that these were insufficient to develop their pedagogical content knowledge for teaching geoscience with technologies. Their research experience, however, positioned these early career teachers as technologically capable. So perhaps some professional learning experiences would help reposition Ethan and Rachel with their duties to teach for technology-enabled learning. To build their capacity to teach other fields, a formal program of geoscience-centered digital experiences using Google Earth were designed for them. And both were invited to reflect on these experiences. Now, at the outset, Rachel reflexively positions herself as aligned with the ideas she's sharing. Her focus on the collaborative relationships with colleagues through talking and thinking together is identified as valuable when teaching out of field with technologies. Notably, Rachel, like Charlotte and William, positions herself as a learner. I just like learning new things, she says. I just like discovering new things. So a sense of job satisfaction seems to come through as Rachel learns with her colleagues, and a sacred story emerges. I can draw on my technological knowledge for teaching when collaborating with colleagues. In his reflection, Ethan seems to be explaining to a group of teachers that there's a necessity to be aware of teaching skills he identifies as beyond the subject-specific content, and that a systematic approach needs to be taken. First, learn the digital skills, then inquire, as opposed to learning the digital skills to inquire. So his sacred story, I'm responsible for teaching digital skills, seems to be a step to enact the intended curriculum. However, the approach is far removed from the use of digital technologies in scientific research. In this presentation, teachers' interview data have demonstrated that acquiring digital proficiency from subject-related professional history does not mitigate managing the use of digital technologies in an out-of-field area. Charlotte was an experienced teacher, and although she did not have a subject-related degree in either geoscience or digital technologies, she was as proficient as William at incorporating them into her practice in pedagogically meaningful ways. The most surprising findings emerged from Rachel and Ethan, who were anticipated to translate their capacity for using technologies in scientific research to the classroom. Although some former industry professionals' knowledge and experience may align with classroom reforms set out by policy, scholars have found that career change teachers may have difficulty contributing to the profession in a number of ways. Notably, Rosten and colleagues draw attention to teacher educators' ineffective modeling of technology use and teachers' insecurity about content knowledge as factors that lead them to stray from offering students meaningful learning experiences. findings are supported by the analysis of Rachel and Ethan's data. Even with in-service support, their self-ascribed duties to teach students digital skills remained distinct. Perhaps Dewey said it best: the belief that all genuine education comes about through experience does not mean that all experiences are genuinely or equally educative. So the extent to which teachers with distinct subject-related professional histories manage their use of digital technologies while teaching out of field is probably better understood as a complex, ongoing development and refinement of classroom pedagogies. As such, I'd like to make the following recommendations. First, pre-service teachers' digital experiences in initial teacher education need to be revisited to assess the successes, and there are successes, but also the opportunity to build our graduate teachers' capacity. Second, school leadership must work toward developing ongoing, differentiated professional learning programs that offer teachers experiences they'll ultimately enact and assess in the classroom. And finally, teachers must be afforded the time and space to collaboratively plan for and enact these experiences. Now, this is not a new recommendation. This is something teachers have been calling for a long time, but we haven't got it right yet. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for listening and for watching the unconventional comic strip presentation.